The 13th Circuit is Hillsborough County here. Some jurisdictions, a circuit will cover multiple counties. In Hillsborough, it's just one county because we're large enough to do so. So they are responsible for prosecutorial discretion and putting away everything from murderers to your simple pot possession, although not the city of Tampa, it's supposed to be headed by citation now. But in any event, it's a broad range of responsibility. Whoever comes out of this election, whether it's the incumbent or the challenger, they are going to assume an office of hundreds of talented, skilled attorneys and staff and investigators. And so they're going to have their hands full dealing with crime in this county. But nonetheless, I will let them introduce themselves. So we'll start first with Mr. Mark Ober. Go on, Mark.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Mark Ober, State Attorney. It has been my great honor to serve you for the past 15 and a half years as the elected State Attorney. When I first campaigned for this office, and to this very day, my number one priority has been to keep this community safe and secure. This office is not about politics or political parties. This office is not about Republicans, Democrats, or Independents. It is about all of us, our families, our friends, and our neighbors. It is about our quality of life in Hillsborough County. Before I ran in 2000, I had 24 years of real experience in the state courtrooms. 10 years as a prosecutor, 14 years as a defense attorney. Because of this, I know a good trial lawyer when I see one. Because of this, I have assembled and worked side by side with the most ethical, dedicated, and professional prosecutors in our country. Leadership starts at the top. Experience is the lifeblood of leadership. Over the years, I have made several solemn promises to each and every one of you. I promised that I would restore the public trust and integrity of the office of the State Attorney. I promised I would have the courage to make the tough decisions required by the law and facts of each case without regard to popular passions or political consequence. I promised I would make you safer. My word has been my bond. I honor our creed of professionalism, which includes I will not knowingly misstate, distort, or improperly exaggerate any fact or opinion, and I will not improperly permit my silence or inaction to mislead anyone. I am happy to tell you, since I've been the State Attorney for 15 years, in Hillsborough County, forcible sex crimes are down by half. Domestic violence-related sex crimes are down by 2/3. Total domestic violence crimes are down by 34%. In Hillsborough County, violent crimes are the lowest since 1985. The city of Tampa boasts of its 14th consecutive year with crime being down. The evidence shows beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt that I've earned the respect and the support of Public Defender Julie Holt, my former opponent in my first election, Robert Schimberg, and former U.S. Attorney Robert O'Neill. I am hopeful that because of my qualifications and experience, I have earned your support. Thank you.
Grab a seat there up front. Yes, sir. Take your pick. All right, with that, now we'll turn it over to Mr. Andrew Warren. And Mr. Warren, just in fairness, he went over by about 30 seconds, so you got additional 30 seconds if you need it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Warren, and I'm proud to be running to be your next State Attorney for Hillsborough County. I spent my career as a federal prosecutor with the United States Department of Justice, prosecuting criminals, fighting for victims, and making communities safer across the country. I started off prosecuting street crime in DC and spent most of my career prosecuting highly complex white-collar crime all over the country. Multi-million and billion-dollar Medicare fraud, securities fraud, corporate corruption cases. I've had the privilege and honor of stepping into courtrooms across America and announcing Andrew Warren on behalf of the United States. I'm running for state attorney to continue the public service that I've done all over the country, here in this community. My two little girls are growing up here, and it's my mission to make it as safe as possible for them, for your families, and for every other law-abiding citizen in Hillsborough. Now, we have problems in our criminal justice system. First, crime is up in Hillsborough County in recent years. Violent crime, murder, rape, domestic violence, as well as economic crime. For too long, we've been too concerned about conviction rates rather than on the safety of our neighborhoods. We have to do a much better job of using your tax dollars wisely to target the crimes that pose the greatest threats to our community. Crimes that threaten our physical safety and our economic security. That's how we build safer neighborhoods. Second, our system here in Hillsborough is a generation outdated. We're like the rotary phone of criminal justice, and we're in need of an upgrade. For example, our juvenile justice system is broken. We charge more juveniles as adults in Hillsborough County than just about anywhere in the entire country. We need to utilize reforms such as restorative justice programs to help reduce recidivism for nonviolent first-time offenders. We need to fix the way we handle death penalty cases. Just last month, a report came out from Harvard Law School finding that Hillsborough was one of the worst counties in the entire country in handling death penalty cases, finding that our practices were both unconstitutional and racially biased. We also need to establish a conviction integrity unit to review questionable convictions to make sure that the people we're locking up are the ones that actually committed the crimes. These are just a few examples of innovative reforms that other major cities have used to modernize and improve their criminal justice system that we need to utilize here in Hillsborough. Lastly, for too long, for far too many people in our community, justice has been only a word. There's no justice for anyone. When the system handles cases differently, based on where you live or where you're from or who your lawyer knows, we need to apply the law fairly and consistently to everyone in the community. Now, some of you may have heard, we have a bit of an old boys network here in Hillsborough. But as an outsider to the Tampa courthouse scene, I'm not going to let my relationships with defense lawyers or anyone else compromise my fairness or integrity. I've pledged to keep politics out of the state attorney's office so that decisions are made on the facts and the facts alone, not on relationships or favors. I look forward to talking with you more over the next hour about these and other ideas as to how we can build a safer and a more fair community. Thank you.
I'm Mimi Osiason, and my question is for both of you. I'd like to know, what are the top 3 criteria by which we should judge a state attorney, and how do you meet them and your opponent not meet them?
Thank you very much. The difference, the overwhelming difference, if I can start with part B of your question, is experience. And growing up in the community, knowing the needs of the community, but the experience that I have over the last almost now 39 years, I've been in the trial courtroom on both sides of the table. So I've been a prosecutor. I was a defense attorney for 14 years. I've prosecuted crimes from capital murder to petty theft. I've defended people for capital murder to petty theft. So I'm very familiar with the experience it needs to run an office of 135 lawyers and over 300 people. There is no substitute for experience. I remain calm and reflectful I look in the mirror and I see myself as a student of the law. Because as we know in my office, the life of law is a life of study. And it's ever changing. There's some very interesting issues involved in many of the expansive areas that Mr. Warren has talked about, and I'll be delighted to discuss those with you later. If we don't have time, I'll wait for you after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren?
Breadth of experience, the attributes of a prosecutor, and the vision for the office. Those are the three things that matter. So I started my career, I cut my teeth prosecuting street crime in DC, and I built a successful career prosecuting complex cases all over the country. Some of the most difficult cases our judicial system sees. That's given me the skills to walk into any courtroom in America and try any type of criminal case. The skills are transferable. It's like saying that Derek Jeter couldn't play for the Rays because he spent his career with the Yankees. It's all baseball. And my breadth of experience gives me a broader perspective on how to prosecute and investigate cases, as well as a broader perspective on understanding policies that have worked in other cities that we should be utilizing in Hillsborough. But beyond experience, it's about the attributes of being a prosecutor. Judgment, integrity, discretion. Judgment to know how to allocate resources effectively to keep our neighborhoods safe. Discretion about who to charge and who not to charge. Who to lock up and throw away the key to be tough on versus who deserves a second chance. And integrity, about doing the right thing even when no one's looking. But lastly, it's about vision. The job of the state attorney is not simply to just pull the levers of the prosecutorial machine. It's about the person who has the vision to build a safer community while promoting justice and fairness for everyone. That vision, frankly, has been lacking here in Hillsborough County, which is why we need new leadership.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Warren. Our next question is going to come from Mr., I know I'm going to butcher the last name, Scherberger, I believe. Did I get that right?
You got it right. You're good. Thank you. This question's for Mr. Warren. I noticed in your flyer here that you distributed, you have a quote from the Tampa Bay Times, an accomplished prosecutor who has been working for the public for years. But if you Google that, what you find is that's actually, you're quoting yourself, because it's a news story about your announcement, and that's from a press release that you sent out. So my question for you is, does that reflect integrity, and what should the voters think of that?
The pamphlet that you're referring to is promoting my experience as a prosecutor and what I'm going to do for Hillsborough County. And as I've talked about before, there are a lot of problems here. And yet, integrity is about doing the right thing when no one's looking. And so, for example, we put out a pledge about politics within the state attorney's office here, because it's important, as I mentioned in my opening, to make sure that decisions are being handled on the facts and on the facts alone. And so, one thing that's happened in the state attorney's office here is we have the politics mixing in with the everyday practice of the state attorney's office. And we see it, for example, with the people that come to support my opponents at all these events. I think it's great that he has supporters here. But the problem is I've seen lots of events during the business week where there are people from the state attorney's office coming to support when they should be in the office doing the work that the taxpayers are paying them to do on behalf of our community. So it's an example of something that we need to keep separate, and my pledge to make sure to keep the politics out of the state attorney's office.
Well, to all the, so we can be very clear, will all the people that work with me please stand up. These folks are here, and I will tell you that, thank you very much. Mr. Warren kicks them in the shin by suggesting the things that he does about their integrity, about, in essence, their rubber stamp of what we do. Because if you look at my flyer, there is nothing more important to the public trust and integrity of the criminal justice system than our ability to openly and objectively weigh information that speaks to a person's guilt or innocence. And we have no greater responsibility than to follow the facts of the law wherever they lead, regardless of popular passions or political consequence. When you look at my flyer, as an outsider, he says, that comes to Tampa, what about community involvement? What about being from this area? Not so you can put something on a campaign flyer. Look at what I've handed you and the great efforts I've had to be involved in the community that I grew up in. That is significant, that is important, and that is fundamental to what we do. So, for the people that are here, Mr. Warren, I can promise you they eat lunch every day. If they are with me at an event, it's after hours, and if not, they do have, Barbara, how much vacation time do you have?
I have 16 and a half hours per month.
So, I can promise you that they are doing what they need to do in that regard.
Okay, Mr. Warren, do you want to respond to that?
And to be clear, I'm not kicking the prosecutors in the shins, as Mr. Ober said, and with all due respect to Mr. Ober, this is a comment on leadership. As a federal prosecutor, I couldn't accept as much as a ham sandwich from defense attorneys that I had investigations pending with. We couldn't accept any type of gift from our subordinates. That's why we need to take the politics out of the office, because there's a question when tens of thousands of dollars have been raised by a candidate from the people that he supervises. And those people are supposed to be public servants and held to a standard of public trust. How do we know who's being promoted based on merit versus based on political support? How do we know when defense lawyers have funded my opponent's campaign, who's getting justice and who's getting favors?
Mr. Ober, I told you I'd allow you all some back and forth. If it warrants, I think it's one of those situations. Go ahead.
If I will sell my soul to the devil for a $1,000 contribution, I don't deserve to be the state attorney.
Okay, thank you. Next question is going to come from board member, Mr. Al McCray. Go on.
Hi, my name is Al McCray. I'm the reporter with Tampa News and Talk.com. I have to first of all thank Mr. Ober. He even called me when I was in the hospital with cancer surgery 3 years ago. That's the kind of guy he is. Okay? And my question is, both of you, I got my legal training inside the big house and the small house and the house in the middle. You know, so I got a pretty good background of criminal justice. But it seemed like one thing I have kind of learned was, you seem to be innocent till proven broke. Of all the adventures I've had, so like when my money ran out, that's when I had most legal problems. Luckily, I've got 3 partners for my adventure. So can you explain how important is money in determining if you're innocent or guilty?
Thank you, Al. Go ahead, Mark. You.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words, Al. Many of you may not know that when I was a defense attorney, I was appointed by the judges of Hillsborough County to represent indigent clients that could not afford a lawyer where there was a conflict with the public defender. I defended a young man charged with murder from Tampa who killed and injured one student at Plain High School and injured another. He was acquitted. He was found not guilty. I believe that certainly to have a lawyer out with great experience is important. But I can tell you, and I'm honored to have the endorsement of our public defender, because Julie Holt's office does a stellar job in representing people that have no funds. They are indigent. And you can talk to the people that are here about the successes that they have, to my detriment at times. But Al, I think that experience with a lawyer on any side of the aisle is fundamental. The public defender system works. It's viable in the federal system, and perhaps I'm a purist, but I believe people get great representation. And now we have a conflict system, regional counsel, and those folks are extraordinary lawyers.
Okay, Mr. Warren?
Al, thanks for the question. Money does matter, unfortunately, in our system. I've gone up against some of the best defense lawyers in this country, well-funded, and we've seen it in local politics and the local state attorney's office as well, in terms of favors that certain attorneys get based on their relationships with the office. But the bigger problem, frankly, that your question addressed comes to the culture of our criminal justice system and the philosophy of criminal justice that we've had for a generation, where we target easy crimes and low-hanging fruit, where we're more concerned about conviction rates and incarceration rates, about simple stats than we are about the safety of our community, where we focused, for example, on misdemeanor drug possession cases rather than on the crimes that really threaten our community. And that's why I talked about as state attorney, one of the most important things that we can do is refocus and reallocate resources to focus on the gang violence that's taking so many innocent lives, domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, economic crimes. That's what poses the biggest threat to our community. And that will level the playing field a little bit in terms of the type of over-policing and overcharging we see, especially for indigent individuals.
All right, thank you, sir. I want everybody to give a nice round of applause. We do have a new member who wants to ask a question, so let's welcome Christina Palin. Am I saying that right? All right, go ahead and introduce yourself before you get into your questions so you can say hi to your new members, your new clubmates here.
Hi, I'm Christina Palin, thank you. This question is for both candidates, and I was wondering, I know that recently we've had a Citizens Review Board that was established to review the conduct and the issues that are going on with the police department. I was wondering how much each of you would be open to having the public, the individuals here and the selected individuals to have the kind of Citizens Review Board to review what the prosecutors are doing and what kind of job is getting done as far as getting the ultimate justice in the system. And Mr. Ober, I know you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that you supervise 300 attorneys. We all know that there's human error. We all know jury verdicts come out that are not right, that do not comport with the truth or with the justice. I was just wondering how open each one of you are with respect to having an outside, much like a Citizens Review Board, to review the cases of conviction.
Thank you. Our newest member also got her first tap on the shoulder from me as well. But thank you. Great question. Go ahead, Mr. Ober.
Thank you. Are you Dr. Palin?
I am.
Thank you for that. The Citizens Review Board is important to the public. However, as you know, the discretion to prosecute crimes and to charge criminal offenses is delegated to the state attorney's office. I support the Citizens Review Board in that regard, so we can have community conversations, but quite frankly, the impact of that is minimal outside of the conversation we have. We can have conversations, there's no subpoena power for that. That would have to be a statutory requirement. I know several of the people, my former opponent who supports me, Robert Schimmer, Judge E.J. Salsinas is on the Citizens Review Board. So they're honorable, very honorable people that are trying to make a difference in our community. But to have it as a checks and balance for the responsibility of a prosecutor is not going to happen as a matter of law. We have all kinds. We are subject to the Florida bar. If we prosecute people wrongfully, we're subject at certain times to being sued. So I hope that answers your question. And I supervise 135 lawyers. I have a total staff of 308.
Okay, Mr. Warren.
Dr. Palin, let me answer your question in two ways. First, with regard to the Citizens Review Board. It's a great idea here in terms of giving the community a voice with regard to criminal justice issues, but it doesn't solve the problem of rebuilding trust between the community and prosecutors. So you need other elements to contribute to that trust rebuilding exercise. You need to have more transparency in how prosecutors and police operate. You need to have standards of accountability for police and what happens when they violate those standards of conduct. Yes, you have to have more engagement from the state attorney's office with the community. But with regard to the second part of your question about what the office should do, there are things that we can do. For example, cases where there's a perceived or potential conflict of interest can be referred out to another investigating and prosecuting agency. For example, they can be sent out across the Bay to Pinellas, to that state attorney's office, or to the Attorney General of Florida, or even to the federal prosecutors. If there's a conflict of interest where we as the state attorney cannot investigate a case without a potential conflict, that's the right remedy. Secondly, as I mentioned in my opening, we can establish a conviction integrity unit. Now, this is a specialized section that exists within prosecutors' offices, separate from the rest of the prosecutors, who are there to review questionable convictions after the fact, based on either changed evidence or new testimony, whatever it may be, to make sure that the people we've put in prison are the ones that belong there. Not only because we may have locked up an innocent person, but because we may not have caught the guilty one. And a conviction integrity unit is something that other offices, other major cities have implemented over the past 5 and 10 years across the country to improve criminal justice. We need one here in Hillsborough County as well.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is also from a new member, Ms. Haiti Ober. I know I always mess up your last name, so I'll let you say it. Go ahead and say your name and then go ahead and ask away.
Haiti Ober, and on behalf of Florida U Judge, this question is for Andrew Warren, but I'd also like to hear Mr. Ober's thoughts on this issue. Mr. Warren, my question regards the last case that you handled prior to running for the position you now seek, state attorney. You handled a federal case for at least a year and a half. In that case, you prosecuted 4 men, and now there's a serious question about whether those men were innocent. In that, your theory of prosecution was that they defrauded the government by billing for customers that they had no proof for. Your theory of prosecution was that they did not have hard copy records of the customers that they were billing for. When you leave last Thanksgiving, you resigned to run for state attorney. The prosecutors that inherited your case only had about 4 weeks to prepare for a trial that was set in January 4th. They discovered by interviewing a main witness, the former director of the Federal Lifeline program, that in fact audio files that your office had amassed 1.5 audio files was also sufficient proof. So my question is this: why should the voters of this county entrust you with the leadership of the state attorney's office when there's a serious question looming over your head about you not knowing the law and possibly prosecuting innocent men? And I got attacked.
With all due respect, ma'am, there's so many factual inaccuracies in what you said that it would take me an hour to address, not 90 seconds. So that was a very difficult case. And prosecuting tough cases aren't for the faint of heart. But that was also a righteous prosecution. There was a mountain of evidence that several individuals had stolen tens of millions of dollars from a government program and ultimately from taxpayers, and used it to finance a lavish lifestyle with Lamborghinis and planes and yachts. But that case actually shows the way our criminal justice system is supposed to work, in 2 respects. 1, we were willing to take on a difficult case, not worried about the risk of losing, but because it was the right thing to do. And second, when at the last minute on the eve of trial, the defendants raised a highly technical defense, my successors in the case, because